Hello, and welcome back to the XR101 series. In this video, we're going to look at some common VR design issues that relate to setting up a project and how we can best craft interactions between the system and the user. This will address matters in height setup, button mapping, hand controller ergonomics, and instructional design. Hopefully, it will provide you with an array of best practice tips for avoiding some of the design pitfalls and will help make your VR projects of a noticeably higher quality. First up, user height. Fortunately, the most recent commercial VR headsets utilise tracking and hardware level setups that minimise problems with user height. Gone, mostly, are the days of loading a game to find your virtual head in the virtual floor, or clipping through the ceiling. However, this does not mean that you can simply ignore user height in your designs. Headsets tend to be calibrated for the individual user, or the headset owner, and recalibrating for a new user is often something of a pain. If your application needs to be swapped between multiple users in particular, then an in-software means of adjusting the height remains very preferable. Whilst relatively quick and easy to implement, unfortunately, simply allowing a user to set their own height may not always be a perfect solution, as the design of your world might naturally exclude individuals of certain heights. For example, if your scene contains tables or cabinets onto which pick-upable objects are placed, and these pickups feel very comfortable to you as the designer, ask yourself, would the action of picking up these objects still feel comfortable if I were a foot taller or a foot shorter? Try designing a VR experience for children and you'll understand this problem very acutely. Unfortunately, there is no quick one-size-fits-all solution here. You need to think carefully about your target user group to establish a likely average height. Then try to design your interactions at a comfortable level for all players within that range. To test you've done this correctly, it is strongly recommended that you get individuals of various heights and physical proportions to test your experience. Then make adjustments based on the feedback you receive. Next, button mapping. Now, depending on your approach to development, you may or may not have various VR interactions already mapped out, for example in the Unreal Engine 4 VR template. Even in such a case, however, it is unlikely that this will cover all the physical interface functions you wish to design, and the majority of VR projects require at least a couple of custom button mappings. How you assign functions to buttons again goes back to the central design premise of understanding your audience and your options. In terms of options, the central consideration is arguably the controller that you are using. The controller can itself be so fundamental to the experience that a designer can select a particular VR headset to develop for purely because of the controller. A good example of this can be seen when considering the hand controllers of the HTC Vive against those of the Oculus Rift. Even on sight, you can see a significant difference in the ergonomics, but these differences become much more apparent during use, where the Vive controller with a grip broadly modelled to emulate the grip of a handgun feels very natural in shooter games such as Arizona Sunshine. The Rift controller by comparison is designed to feel almost invisible in the hand, or at least to feel like a physical extension of the user's hands, and it is optimised to make object manipulations such as pulling levers and opening doors, but also more fine motor actions, such as bomb disposal in I Expect You to Die, feel as natural and intuitive as possible. From this, it isn't difficult to appreciate how the type of experience you wish to design can have a big impact on the controller you use before you even think about how you use it. As has been previously mentioned, understanding your options is always half the battle. Next, you need to understand your user. Who exactly are your users? Are they new to VR, or have they experienced similar experiences before? And if so, has that given them expectations of standardized control layouts? Do they have any pre-established understanding of button mapping from other experiences, say from using a games console? Without knowing the answers to these questions, your project can risk failure, but don't forget, VR design is not always about giving the user what they want. Virtual reality is an inherently novel way of human-computer interaction, and one of its biggest assets is its power to surprise. Replicating button mapping from an FPS template onto your VR project might match your user group's prior experience, but it will almost certainly feel completely unnatural in a VR context. With that in mind, the following pointers will hopefully help you get a few steps closer to creating that perfect physical interface. Firstly, make actions accessible and physically easy to carry out. If the absolute basics of interacting with your system are difficult, users will almost certainly rage quit before giving your experience a chance. Second, think about user fatigue. A great VR experience will require the user to engage in physically draining movements. Such movements can really improve presence and engagement, but not for extended periods. If your average user is exhausted less than halfway through a section of your experience, you need to dial back the workout you're making them do, unless that's the point, of course. Finally, make button mapping clear. We'll come back to this in the next item on our list, but in brief, this could be done by providing direct instructions within the game, or attaching button to function labels to your controller. But the point is to make sure your user never has to guess the controls, unless they are so intuitively set up that the vast majority of users can figure them out naturally. The last item on our agenda for this video is called instructional design. Instructional design is all about how you orientate your users within your world and enable them to engage with the functions, tasks, and interactions that you've created. This could easily be a video in its own right, but there's a lot of overlap with points that we've already discussed in previous videos. So to cut to the key pointers, consider the following for your projects. First, think diegetically. Find ways to put instruction in the world. This could mean voiceover instructions are delivered by a visible NPC, or they could appear as updates on your ARM-mounted virtual interface, or they could be carved into stone tablets that the user could pick up and beat enemies with. However you go about this is completely up to you, but consider the theme and narrative of your experience to make diegetic instruction that makes the world seem more coherent and consistent. Second, always think about audio. We've already talked about this in a separate video, but it bears repeating that instruction delivered as a voiceover is typically much easier to follow and to stay engaged with. However, do think about the type of information that you're presenting. If the instructions are quite linear, like a sequence of steps to follow, audio can be ideal. If the information is non-linear or more interpretive, then maybe you should consider the next pointer. That next pointer is to consider visualizations and symbols. Can your instruction be presented as images or symbols that can be understood at a glance? Text instructions bring up language issues, whilst symbols can be more universal, but they can also be understood much more quickly. Finally, think constructively. Constructivism is a theory of learning that broadly argues people learn best through doing. In contexts such as VR, where the tasks are often a blend of cognitive and physical activity, this is especially true. To support learning by doing, consider providing an initial safe space, a kind of hub free from threats and timers, but that presents opportunity to perform the basic interactions. An obvious example of this would be starting the user in a shooting range where they can practice the key interactions of shooting in their own time, then move on to the core game, at which point enemies can be introduced. When you look at a lot of VR games, you can see this technique being implemented, from the mission briefing space of Robo Recall to the trailer in Arizona Sunshine. Hopefully this video has filled in a few blanks that you may have had regarding certain aspects of VR design. Some of these tips are equally relevant and can be implemented in much the same way irrespective of your specific project, but the vast majority of issues require you to consider them in the context of your project. A generic approach to many of these issues will lead to a generic experience, whereas a contextualized approach will give you a much greater chance to present your users with a coherent, a memorable, and an enjoyable VR experience. Thanks for watching.